And we welcome you back into the Pabst Blue Ribbon Gateway Buick GMC Slaten Unleashed show, only on TalkSTL.com. And as promised, joining us from FramingPaterno.com is John Ziegler. John, how are you today?
Doing very well now that the truth is starting to slowly come out, and you and I are being vindicated almost on a daily basis.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? I know that there were times when you never thought we'd see this day, and yet here we are, and we can thank the court system for allowing discovery. That's the only way some of the truth would have come out here with regard to Louis Freeh's role with the NCAA and Mark Emmert, who are acting clearly in concert now, as we see in these emails. And in addition, Freeh was almost the de facto enforcement officer for the NCAA.
Yeah, and this is really important, and of course the news media still can't figure it out. I mean, the news media is like the proverbial blind guy who runs into an elephant, grabs his trunk, and thinks it's a water hose. I mean, they really have no clue how to put all these pieces together. They think, oh, well, this is interesting, but they don't look at the big picture because they think they already know the real story or the outcome, and they're not that interested and, frankly, not that smart. You and I understand how important this is because you and I have based a large part of our theory of what happened here on the notion that Louis Freeh was in the tank for a Penn State Board of Trustees that needed a justification for the firing of Joe Paterno and for also Graham Spanier, the president of the university, and that his investigation was therefore not only not credible, but it had a massive conflict of interest, and that the NCAA's actions right on the coattails of Louis Freeh just 2 weeks later was not legitimate because it was based upon a false and corrupt report put out by Louis Freeh, who, by the way, has a history, as you well know, of putting out reports that just happen to match exactly what the people paying him want to hear. And what I find fascinating, Kevin, is that what was shocking to me about these emails, not that there was collusion, although, and it's also important, and this is something you like to say all the time, you know, if you lie in one area, you're going to lie in another area. We now know that Freeh, the NCAA, and the Penn State Board of Trustees all lied when they said that Freeh was doing a completely clear and independent investigation.
It's just
That's
a lie.
It's in writing. It's in writing. All parties put that in writing, and it's a lie.
Here's a question, John, that I find interesting. They're saying that the NCAA is now, of course, defending themselves. Oh, these were just normal contacts. My question is, why would Louis Freeh be in contact with the NCAA, period, while investigating Penn State and the Sandusky scandal? There's nothing the NCAA can offer. It's way beyond their scope of authority. So what are you even talking to them for if you're not in collusion with them to arrive at a predetermined result?
Well said, and I'll take it one step further. Yeah, the predetermined result is obviously the most important part of this because it's not just keeping them informed. It's for the NCAA to be involved, that means you have to come up with a conclusion, if you're Louis Freeh, that implicates Penn State, right? Otherwise, right. The NCAA has no even theoretical reason for being involved. But look at the timing of these communications. This is November and early December of 2011. Let's take a look at what's going on at this time. We know nothing about this case in November of 2011 and December of 2011. In fact, we know so little about what was going on. At that time, everyone thought that the only episode that actually had a date and that was connected to Penn State was in 2002, the McQueary episode. That turned out to be false.
Right.
These people are writing emails thinking they know the result of a case that they don't even know the year in which the episode happened at this time. I mean, if that doesn't show an unbelievable, not just a rush to judgment, a flying leap off of a cliff to misjudgment, I don't know what does. And, of course, the most important element from my perspective here is not only do we know nothing when these emails are starting to be exchanged, Sandusky hasn't even had a preliminary hearing. Not one person has testified publicly. Not one person has undergone cross-examination at this time. Not McQueary, not any of the accusers. Nobody. I mean, it's insane. It's laughable. If it wasn't so obviously unjust and wrong, it would be laughable. But see, that the layperson needs to understand, and I think and I think you'll agree with me, Kevin. The fundamental misunderstanding that the media and the public has here is they think that when Penn State declares Joe Paterno and Graham Spanier guilty by firing them, and in a de facto fashion declaring Jerry Sandusky guilty 5 days after a BS grand jury presentment, that meant they were actually guilty, because it's logical, right?
Right.
I mean, why would Penn State do that if they didn't know it to be true? And what we have learned from these emails is, among many other things, what you and I suspected all along, that the Penn State Board of Trustees, and therefore anyone that was paying, or they were paying, like Louis Freeh, had an inverse self-interest to what people perceive it to be. And that's the fundamental misunderstanding people don't have in this case. You know, we live in a world where if a Democrat says a Democrat is wrong, we know that that Democrat must be wrong, right? Because that's the way the game works. Of course, you know, that hardly ever happens because the media won't report it, but that's another story. But you know, certainly if a Republican says a Republican is wrong, the media praises and says, aha, see, there must be wrong, because a Republican wouldn't do that. Well, but in this case, people misidentified who the Democrats and the Republicans were, to use that analogy.
That's a great analogy. And John, let's keep in mind the climate at the time. The NCAA and Emmert were under heavy scrutiny and a lot of criticism for not having acted in several instances of other schools. Right. All of a sudden, they need a big hit where they show their toughness. And so Freeh and Emmert get together, and in my opinion, in collusion with Rodney Erickson, and all come to the same conclusion. We'll give the NCAA their hit, Penn State will get this done, and Louis Freeh will trot off like a hero of some sort because he took Joe Paterno down.
I couldn't agree more, although, as usual, I'll go one step further. And as you know, Franco Harris and I confronted Mark Emmert in Los Angeles not long after this happened, got him on audio, which is startling audio, which you can hear what a buffoon he is at framingpaterno.com. As you know, I confronted Rodney Erickson in person here in Los Angeles at a cocktail party where he didn't even know who I was.
That was one of the best.
It was hilarious. You can see video of that at framingpaterno.com. I've seen both of these key people in person. I've looked them in the eye. I've confronted them. I know how stupid they are, how cowardly they are, and it's incredibly important for me, for people to know, and I don't think you're implying otherwise, but this was not a conspiracy. These were idiots who thought they were doing the right thing because the media was telling them they were doing the right thing. If you're being praised, this is the Christine Brennan effect. If you're being praised everywhere in the news media for doing the right thing and fighting child sex abuse, you are going to easily rationalize that what you're doing, no matter how insane, no matter how lacking in logic or backed by facts it is, you're going to rationalize that it must be the right course of action. And so the media the fuel here. The media is driving a hurricane wind at their backs. And to your point about the NCAA, this was a rare opportunity for them to re-exert their authority, to be able to step in and say, hey, we actually do matter, and we're going to matter so much that we're going to take a program that we had just the year before, and not even a year before, less than a year before, had used as the example as the perfect NCAA program, Penn State football, and we're going to destroy it just to show you how big our muscles are now. And that's really what happened here. But again, it's not a conspiracy, folks. It is a bunch of wimpy morons being convinced by the news media that they're doing the right thing to fight child sex abuse. That, to me, is far more logical explanation for what happened here.
You know, as we talk with John Ziegler from framingpaterno.com, John, many people in this bizarre, convoluted road that you and I have taken have attacked you because Scott Paterno, one of Joe Paterno's sons, who's an attorney involved in some of this, was criticizing you publicly on behalf of the family. And so a lot of people seem to think that if there was a case to be made that Sandusky wasn't guilty of any of these things, that it was in their self-interest, the Paterno and Scott Paterno family, to make it a case for it. Now, are those people wrong, do you think?
Well, this is a subject that is obviously near and dear to my heart because it's an understandable question. especially after what Scott Paterno did to me when I went on the Today Show last year, and with Matt Lauer, I proved in a rational world, I think you'll agree with this, I proved in a rational world that the McQueary episode did not happen as we were told. And yet I was discredited by Scott Paterno in a way that, well, people, just like in the analogy I was using before with the Democrats and the Republicans, well, my God, if they're on the same side and Scott Paterno is saying John Ziegler is wrong, then John Ziegler must be wrong, right, especially since he's got the Paterno last name. I understand why people who don't follow this think that. But just like the Penn State Board of Trustees, Scott Paterno especially, and the Paterno family now as a whole because of Scott's influence, has a bizarre inverse relationship when it comes to their incentives. And because Scott Paterno, 2 days after this story started, 2 days, he went on the front lawn of the Paterno house and in front of television cameras declared the accusers to be victims in this case, effectively declared in the Paterno name that Jerry Sandusky was guilty and that there had been great damage done to many boys in this case, and that Scott Paterno made it clear that they were backing Mike McQueary, and he has told me in person, which I have a record of, which I put at framingpaterno.com on multiple occasions, he will never let anything in the Paterno name criticize Mike McQueary. Because Scott bought in very early on, and he's a Republican lobbyist, this was a Republican investigation. He was not going to cross this investigation. He bought in that a guy he did not know. Now, Jay Paterno, who does not believe Jerry is guilty, Jay Paterno knew Jerry very well. They coached together. In fact, Jay Paterno sent his daughter to a birthday party at Jerry Sandusky's house literally just before the crap hit the fan on this. Jay knows the truth, but he can't say the truth. Scott didn't know Jerry Sandusky from Jerry Glanville, all right? And so Scott got duped, and he got locked into a story because in the short run, he thought that was the best way to get through that first week.
Right.
To placate the media, to placate it, show everyone we get it. We understand it. We're embracing the victims. We understand how much damage was done here. They threw Jerry under the bus, and it was not based in truth. It was not based in fact. It was based in a misguided attempt to survive the media firestorm. And it didn't work, and it wasn't based in truth, and it has absolutely nothing to do with whether I'm telling the truth about what happened here. As a matter of fact, Scott Paterno is the only person close to this case that actually disagrees with me privately. Now, people won't say it publicly because it's so toxic, but I've told Scott, tell me how I'm wrong. Tell me how I'm wrong. I will shut down framingpaterno.com. I will issue a public apology to you. I've never gotten a substantive response. And the last thing I'll mention here, Kevin, this is important. Scott Paterno, I believe, is the person, the only logical explanation for Joe Paterno's grand jury testimony is that Scott Paterno and or Mike McQueary inadvertently, or maybe even on purpose but with good intentions, misrefreshed Joe's 10-year-old recollection at the age of 84 of his conversation with Mike McQueary. Scott has never denied that. I believe it's the only logical explanation, and it is why he has tied himself to a narrative that is false and damaging.
I've always believed that Scott's initial reactions to this, as you've described them here, in terms of insisting on Sandusky's guilt, were to protect his dad at all costs, no matter what, which is understandable. And yet, in the early stages of any investigation, you can never take a stand without all of the information. And so when you do that, no matter whether or not you're on the side of what everybody believes, it's really irrelevant, and it can do reverse damage. And I think it did with Scott in this entire narrative of what actually did take place versus what he insisted took place early on.
And it's influenced everything that's happened since then, Kevin, because it's why they hired Jim Clemente to do the Clemente report. I've spoken with Jim Clemente for hours and hours and hours. He's a buffoon. He knows nothing about the case. He interviewed nobody in this case. He told me that I was going to be able to, he guaranteed me I'd be able to get Jerry Sandusky to confess. I did exactly what he told me to do when I went to interview Jerry Sandusky in prison. He congratulated me for doing it exactly as he told me to. didn't come close to working because he doesn't understand the special nature of this case, Kevin. He's working on normal rules of a child sex abuse case. This case breaks all the rules. Everything's upside down. Up is down, down is up. And Scott Paterno's role is a perfect example of that. And by the way, I've been fair to Scott. I understand politically what he was trying to do that first week in November of 2011. It didn't work because he didn't realize he wasn't dealing in a normal world. In a normal world, it might have worked, but we were in Alice in Wonderland in November of 2011 on this, and it didn't work in the short run, and it destroyed both the truth as well as any chance to exonerate his father, or his client as he refers to him, in the long run. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell people what really happened here because it's the key to understanding everything about this case.
Here's what's always struck me. Bob Costas, as you well know, has invited Emmert and Louis Freeh to come on a show that he did with Dick Thornburg regarding the Paterno Family Report. And I do respect Thornburg's work. Neither of them have ever accepted that invitation. Neither of them have ever spoken in order to defend their positions. Freeh has never spoken to defend his report, which is bizarre. If you really put in an investigative effort and you come to these horrendous conclusions that affected so many lives, wouldn't you be only too proud of your report to stand there and say, here's why it's accurate, here's why any criticism of this report is unfounded? And this coward, this guy who ran the FBI, who was a federal judge, is nothing if not a two-bit coward.
Well said, and I think it's one of the most stunning situations that occurred media-wise of 100 stunning circumstances, maybe 1,000 stunning circumstances that I've experienced firsthand in the last 3 years, especially when you consider that it's part of Freeh's contract that he answer questions about this. But when Bob Costas, the biggest name in sportscasting, offers, and let's be fair to Bob, I mean, Bob was not going to unfairly attack Louis Freeh or Mark Emmert. I mean, I can understand them not coming on your show where you're going to just destroy them, I mean, or doing an interview with me where I'll do the same. Bob is going to be eminently fair. He's going to give them every benefit of the doubt. He's got more gravitas than anybody else in sportscasting, and you're afraid to answer questions from him? I mean, seriously? That, to me, in a rational world, that shows that you are afraid of your own conclusions. You have nothing to back it up.
Right.
There's no other explanation.
That's all. There is no other explanation. And by the way, I'll go one step further this time. There's no reason for them not to come on with me or you if their report and their discipline is well-founded or justified.
Oh, I agree with that. I'm just talking about public perception.
Right.
I mean, how do you dodge Bob Costas?
You don't.
Who's going to,
And yet the media let him off easy.
Oh, well, worse than that, they didn't even mention it. I mean, I don't think it's ever been mentioned. If it was, I missed it. I don't think it's ever been mentioned that Louis Freeh and Mark Emmert ducked Bob Costas with absolutely no explanation or excuse.
It was mentioned on his show because he mentioned it, and it was mentioned by you and me ad nauseum. But you're right. I've never seen it on ESPN's Sports Center. I've never seen it on ESPN's Outside the Lines, which is stunning, by the way, that they're even involved in this now all of a sudden. Outside the Lines is awakened from the doldrums of the 3 years of hibernation and actually looked into this. I thought Bob's suggestion was always a good one. The 30 for 30, this was a perfect story for them where they can do a lengthy investigation, and yet ESPN chose not to.
But that's because ESPN would have to destroy themselves, which is not going to happen. But one other point on this ducking people thing. Just recently, Dottie Sandusky put out an op-ed piece about this movie Happy Valley, which is opening in State College tonight, which is a bunch of just absolute balderdash, the whole movie. And the family statement about Matt Sandusky's role in this movie, they offer Dottie Sandusky up to do a mutual media appearance with Matt Sandusky, who in this film says he wants communication with the family. So we've offered Dottie up. All right, Matt, if you want to meet the family, how about you and Dottie mutually agreed to media appearance together? There's not a chance in the world Matt's going to do that. And I've topped that offer by saying I'll give $10,000 to Matt Sandusky's foundation if he just spends an hour and a half with me. Of course, he'll never make it an hour and a half with me on an on-camera interview. And Matt Sandusky won't take that offer either, even though it's for his own charity foundation. What does that tell you? It tells you Matt Sandusky is a lying sack of crap, the biggest lying sack of crap in this whole case. It's not even close, and he's the rest of this case on steroids.
That's amazing that somebody could be the biggest lying piece of crap in this case and it not even be close. Because,
you know what, though? I'm going to stand by that statement as well as you said it, though. It's very, very well said, Kevin.
I mean, there are more liars in this case than there are anybody. There's only two of us telling the truth. You, me, well, Bob Costas. There's three of us. There's three of us.
I'm happy to be in that group.
I am too.
I'm honored.
I am too. I'm always honored to be on the side of the truth. And your point about Matt Sandusky is amazing. I mean, and yet, John, for what we all know the reasons why ESPN won't look into stuff like that, because they have to turn on their own narrative. And yet this Outside the Lines is essentially doing that, at least at a lower echelon of publicity.
Well, you just nailed it. And this is, I've done 3 documentary films on the media, 3 different stories where the media blew it, including the framing of Joe Paterno, which is free, which people can see at framingpaterno.com and on YouTube. And if there's one thing that people need to know about the modern fragmented news media, among thousands, it's this. You just hit on it. See, it's no longer what gets reported that matters. It's what gets repeated that matters. Because we live in a fragmented world, every single one of these media outlets, like, for instance, take the NCAA emails. Everyone's reporting it. No one's connecting the dots. But
right.
They're reporting it once in a muted fashion, or maybe on their websites, or maybe in a 15-second or 20-second story on television, or on page 18 in the newspaper. And so they're able to say, well, we reported it, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same magnitude as back in November of 2011, when 24/7 the entire world was bombarded with a completely false, not just a false. I mean, I know you and I like to say false narrative. Not just a false narrative, a completely ridiculous on its face narrative. A narrative that in a million years couldn't possibly be true, even if you had real evidence for it.
Is part of this, John, as we talk with John Ziegler from framingpaterno.com, isn't part of this inundation by the media without regard for the facts and the people simply accepting it? Isn't that part of a culture change where people simply don't think for themselves? They don't question things. For instance, when you hear the idiocracy of this narrative, as you just described it and as I am, your logical brain would say, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. And yet people just, okay, well, ESPN said so it must be right.
Well, yes, but in this case, that yes had 5 exclamation points next to it because of the topic, child sexual abuse. And people's brains, understandably, explode. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old child. I mean, I'm like everybody else. I abhor child sex abuse. I get called a child sex abuse defender all the time. It's ridiculous, but it's so ridiculous I don't even care. But in this situation, we got a world now, Kevin, where everyone's busy. Everyone, looks at headlines. Our attention spans are incredibly short. The media is horrific. It's horrendous. It's fluff. They never give you the details. And if everybody's telling you the same thing, and if in your brain you go, well, Penn State says it's true, so therefore it must be true, you never investigate it further, especially in a story that's frankly icky. I mean, nobody wants to delve into. You think I wanted to delve into the details of this thing for the last 3 years of my life? You think this has been a picnic for me? I mean, this has been the most hellish 3 years of my life, and I've lived a weird life. I mean, this is beyond horrific. The allegations in this case, but when you delve into the muck on this, you start to realize, wait a minute, none of this makes any damn damn sense. And I mean none of it. And I frankly believe I'm the only one telling a story that makes any damn sense, that's consistent with all the facts, most of which most people have no clue about. And I'm somebody who believes the truth ought to matter, and like you do. And unfortunately, I don't think the truth really matters very much to people anymore. I've even had people tell me who are Penn Staters, you know what, Jerry's probably innocent, but you know what, who cares? He was stupid enough to.
Who cares?
No, I'm being serious. He was stupid enough to shower with boys, and we suffered so much because of it. Screw him. I mean, I'm like, what?
It's interesting because I was having this conversation this morning. When did people stop caring about other people? People just don't care. I had sent Bob Costas a text after it was revealed that these emails were coming out, and I said, Joe Paterno may have his day yet, and he said, I believe he will. Do you think he will? I do believe he will because of these court cases. I believe that statue is going to end up back up, and I believe that the victories, of course, will be restored. Now the question becomes this. We all know what happens when you're accused of, in a case like this. No matter what they put back up, statues, victories, his name is what matters, and his name was forever tainted by this Louis Freeh, this coward Mark Emmert, and Penn State's Board of Trustees / spineless President Rodney Erickson. How do you get that back?
Well, to answer your first question, Kevin, I think you will agree that my track record on seeing how this is all going to turn out and where this was going has been, I've been pretty ahead of the curve most of the time on this for the last 3 years. And because I've been ahead of the curve, psychologically, I'm in a weird spot. And almost to the point where it's detrimental to my own. I can't even get any joy out of the victories because I've already accepted that we've won on Joe Paterno. In my mind, the victories are for coming back for sure. I mean, it's not even a question.
Right.
In my mind, it's just a matter of when the statue goes back up and how and where. I mean, those are I'm positive. It's not even a question in my mind. Not because it's, by the way, I knew that should have been the case 2.5 years ago, Kevin, but now I see that politically we're in a situation, and Bob Costas is a great example of that. We're politically in a situation where I'm positive this is going to happen. I don't know the exact date. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but it will happen. Joe Paterno will be made whole. And from a personal standpoint, Kevin, it's actually kind of frustrating for me because I've already accepted that before it happens, but now I'm actually on to the next part of the injustice, which is that I don't want people to just stop there because that wasn't the end of the injustice. That might have been the most obvious, the most heinous, the most ridiculous part of the injustice, but it wasn't all of it. In fact, it might only be the tip of the iceberg on this. And it just really bothers me that no one wants to put all the pieces together, that we've now proven that every single entity, and I mean every single entity that looked at this, including, by the way, the Paterno family, had a reason to get it wrong, either through incompetence, corruption, or a bizarre self-interest. And yet we're still accepting the basic reality that Jerry Sandusky is a monster who should die in a maximum security prison without ever having human contact again the rest of his life. I'm sorry, and I don't even like Jerry that much. I mean, I can't live with this. It's driving me crazy. I mean, not crazy to where I can't understand reality, but figuratively, it is a burden that I'm having a very difficult time personally dealing with. And more people every day are starting to agree with me, which is satisfying, but it's never going to be close enough to make a difference here. And it's been very frustrating, and I just hope people, once Joe Paterno is made whole, they realize that that's the beginning of the injustice, not the end of it.
And sadly, I believe these people killed Joe Paterno. I've always believed that. Yes. And he's not around to see his day of vindication. But when you give of your life, as he did for 60-some-odd years to a university, and see that university turn on you, those are the people that I hope rot in hell. And those are the people, Rodney Erickson, those trustees, Corbett, Emmert, and Freeh. Corbett is another one. This guy ran for re-election as a governor this past week and lost. And he lost by about the same amount of votes as there are Penn State alumni. I said, if you don't think there's power in that alumni base, Tom Corbett just found out there was.
I agree. I don't think he lost only because of that, but it was a big part of it. And there's no question Tom Corbett pulled the trigger that fired Joe Paterno and effectively killed him. No question about that. And that Tom Corbett should have known better more than anybody else in that board because it was his attorney general's office that supported Joe Paterno 4 days earlier in an article by the Pulitzer Prize-winning, it's a joke Pulitzer Prize-winning Sarah Ganim. I mean, his own Attorney General's office, this is so important, on the first day of the story, was the source of a headline Joe Paterno praised for his handling of Jerry Sandusky's sex abuse suspicions. That's the exact headline by the Pulitzer Prize winner, and it was his Attorney General's office that was the source there. Joe Paterno was the reason why they decided to indict Sandusky, because without him backing up Mike McQueary, Jerry's playing golf right now, although it's probably too cold in State College, but you get the point. The reality is Joe Paterno was their hero, and he threw Joe Paterno under the bus because it was politically expedient at the time, and the blood of Joe Paterno is on the hands of Tom Corbett.
No doubt about it. Well stated. It is right to the point. And if Tom Corbett doesn't get that, apparently the voters did. And I of course, everybody gets elected or voted out of office on a myriad of reasons. But there is no question in my mind that he would have won re-election had it not been for this case and what he did to Joe Paterno.
I agree with that. I'll just add the other element, because I'm a political guy. I do think that a lot of people in Pennsylvania had the opposite view of this story, which was that somehow Corbett was allowing Jerry Sandusky for 3 years to be raping boys, which wasn't happening, during the investigation because he was afraid of the political fallout from the case. And so he actually had the worst of both worlds. He had the pro-Paterno people and the people who hated Penn State and thought Corbett wasn't strong enough against Penn State, and that was a set of circumstances he couldn't overcome. But you know what? Screw him. I don't care. He deserved to lose, and I'm glad that he did.
John, where can people see that documentary, Happy Valley?
Well, the best place to see it is at framingpaterno.com, because I've done 2 videos. You'll love this, Kevin. I forgot to tell you. I've done 2 videos using actual clips from the film, which I got surreptitiously. I've gotten a cease and desist letter from the lawyers from Happy Valley. Very nasty cease and desist letter, which I'll be posting at Framing Paterno somewhat soon. My response to them was rather hilarious, which was to thank them very much for the letter that will look great on my website. And I can't wait for Dottie Sandusky's defamation lawsuit against you and Matt Sandusky and Andrew Shubin, Matt's attorney, for allowing the utter lies to be told that you should have known were lies in your movie Happy Valley. So this is going to be a lot of fun, as it usually is at framingpaterno.com.
Great stuff as always, John. Thanks for the visit and have a great weekend.
You too, Kevin.
Thank you. That's John Ziegler from framingpaterno.com right here on the Pabst Blue Ribbon